Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. We are here with Nima Gardideh from Pearmill.com. Now, Pearmill is a tech-powered growth studio that combines the power of artful creativity with precision targeting on major digital platforms. So we're going to be talking today with Nima about how growth experimentation should be done and these principles behind producing and designing creatives and landing pages. So exciting stuff. Nima, glad to be talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm super glad to have you. It's always fun to have these exciting conversations. And so what is your current sort of passion and focus the last 6 months or so?
At the company, I have been focusing more on trying to think about how we can systematize some of the work that we're doing. So, for context, we spend quite a few $1 million a month on advertising for a bunch of different clients. And historically, we've only worked with something like 10 clients at a time, even though they're at massive scale. And now we're trying to shift the company towards sort of working with earlier stage companies a little bit more, mostly because that we find that interesting. And we want to sort of go deeper into the specific different crafts of the work that we do. So, for paid marketing, you have to basically do 4 different things at a minimum in order to achieve performance. One is sort of media buying and growth marketing, sort of like going and actually buying these things and doing audience tests and things like that. One is ad creative production. One is landing page optimization. And the other one is sort of like data engineering, attribution modeling, data science, etc. And so we've had all these folks together working on specific problems for brands that we work with. But now we're trying to sort of do each of these things separately in order to sort of have those teams get better at the specific craft. I think they've been very good at cohesively working together, and now they want just more reps on, CRO or landing page design or ad creative product production. So my job has been trying to figure out how to create these processes and then work with brands to, put them in front of our teams to do that work. But so that's kind of like the work of a founder, but our work obviously is in marketing, generally speaking, right?
Yeah, and I can see how that sort of undertaking requires a lot of deep thought, because like when you even just kind of like just digesting what you were saying, it's like when you're doing all this kind of advertising and like the making all the creatives, you want to have the magic, right? You want to have the art side of things, but then that's unpredictable, that's unreliable. But you also want to be always like, putting out the new ads every day, playing with the data, creating the new landing pages. And that's kind of the science side of the coin. And I loved when Facebook allowed you to look at someone's ads, right? When a few years ago, they added that feature, you can go to someone's landing page and just look at their ads. And some of these most successful brands out there, I just scroll and I'm like, they made, thousands of Facebook ads. They're doing like the quality plus the quantity. So I can see how that's like a really deep, tough problem to solve and how that can be creatively challenging. So to kind of give us an idea of like these sorts of clients that you have, can you walk us through like a typical, like a success story or just some kind of a tale that demonstrates the great work your team does?
For sure. Yeah. And just to like address what you just said, like, just this ad. So basically you're talking about the Facebook ads library, right? And TikTok has one and LinkedIn has one and stuff. It's funny. So we actually have a tool that we built internally that automatically notifies us when any of the brands that we're tracking produced a new ad. So then our team can go take a look and see like, what are they doing? What are they trying out? And we actually are hoping to actually share that tool with other companies and build like a micro SaaS product out of it right now. So that's one of the other things I'm working on is our engineering team is just ramping up to put that out there as a product. But, just to give you an example of what we do, one of our maybe favorite stories is this company called Sonder, that's a distributed hotel. We've been with them for years and took them through an IPO. And this is when we were just figuring out how to sort of build this ad creative production muscle in a way that not only are we producing a lot, but also are we learning something from each of these creative testing rounds? And what we learned for that brand, and they're hotels that have like thousands and thousands of properties. we figured out that if the video or the hook that we have shows that the building or the unit has tall ceilings, there is a kitchen available, and or there are big windows available, those three things coming together turn out to increase the conversion by like a factor of 2. And it was quite funny how we got there. For a while, we thought it was this green couch. That was the reason, but the reason for the green couch was it just happened that the units that had green couches in them, because it was just their newer units, had done this photography in this way. And so over time, as we ran these creative tests, we learned that these are the 3 elements that need to be there. And if you even go under ads library now, you'll see like these 3 things are in there. Now we also learned that pools are important, of course, in the areas that you have pools. But how we then told the story was around, hey, this is not just a hotel. You can literally cook in here and live here for a long period of time, because that's what they were looking for. This is maybe during COVID when short-term stays were really not feasible because traveling basically had come to a halt, but people were looking for these longer term stays because, let's say, they were facing they were doctors or nurses or people on the front lines and needed space to be away from their family to not risk their health. And so we were then discounting this stuff at almost close to cost to then have people stay for long periods of time in order for that brand to not take a huge hit on their revenue and really margins, right? And so we were able to tell the story by learning what are the things that people were looking for organically through the data, right? And then we recognize why that was the case and went deeper into the messaging. But a lot of it is just discovery of information from the tests that we run in a controlled way. So we can actually trust these learnings. And there's a whole like slew of things that we do in order to make sure creative tests are trustable, and that like after one of them does well, we can say with some certainty. You can never get perfect certainty, unfortunately, in these ad networks because of all the machine learning targeting that they do. But with some certainty, you can tell that this piece of creative did well and is going to do well. And then you can, introspect. Why did it do well? What can we test to get the core understanding of the value of the product and the service that we're trying to market in order to then produce better iterative rounds?
I like that a lot. I think I've seen it stated so many times, but there was something the other day where they said something like, well, if you can't explain it in simple terms, you don't understand it. And I like your mindset there of saying like there's this idea of distilling all the information that comes in and learning to love learning, and then being like eager to see what your competitors are doing, because there's like the childish temptation from when we were younger to say, ooh, what are my competitors doing? Let me copy them, or let me get frustrated at how far ahead they are. But you're saying, well, let's just look at the little scraps and just see what the trends are, right? What's up and coming, what's happening now. So that way you can figure out that you can like pour through this mountain of data, do all these tests to figure out those little key factors, those weird, silly, unspoken rules of this or that platform that probably won't last because they're always changing the algorithm. But for the time being, you can figure out, well, having the kitchen in the short-term rental listing is what works. Or like you hear about, like someone told me the other day, like just posting about hiring on LinkedIn, they give you more views for some reason. And there's like, funny stuff like that, how just like doing this one little tweak really gives you like the biggest boost there. And so you have this team and they love poring over data and love running experiments. And it's always fun with like entrepreneurs and startups to talk about the failures and the struggles. So do you have anything to share with us in that department, in just like some area where you've like maybe struggled, panicked, were frustrated recently?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. And just to address like the point that you made there, the way I like to talk about that is just that, as a marketer, you're in 2 forms of auctions, right? Auction number 1 is just the budgetary auction, right? So you're bidding for impressions, and there is an auction where you're trying to bid for more impressions and clicks and so on and so forth. But there is a more like meta auction, which is the visual auction. And the idea that is that you need to visually differentiate in a significant way, where as a user, that I'm scrolling through my feed on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok and so on and so forth, when I see your visuals, when I see your hook versus the competitors, you stand out, but also blend in at the same time. If you're standing out so much that I don't want to see this, it's just too off the sort of native sense of that platform, right? So there, if it's fitting in well within TikTok, you're doing a good job, but at the same time, it needs to be differentiated enough against your competitors and against the rest of the feed for you to stick around. So there is sort of like a visual auction for you to think about as a marketer. Yeah, I think that the struggles are always, I think they're like interestingly recurring for us, right? So one is being able to consistently learn turns out to be hard. And the reason for that is mostly human error. Quite often from our clients, but also even folks that are new to the ecosystem that we hire, especially on the creative side, where they don't understand how to run tests in a way where we can actually end up learning something, right? Or quite often clients are not patient enough to wait for the data to come in to make decisions. And so the failure for us is quite often on the education part. Like, can we teach the clients and make sure they understand why we have to wait a whole week before we decide, a minimum, a whole week before we make decisions on creative tests or audience tests that we're running. So a lot of the, I would say, failures are on sort of like systemic understanding of statistical significance and data, because they're quite unintuitive to most people, including myself, and I'm, an engineer. So that a lot of the issues that bubble up are on that front. And quite interestingly, we do struggle with competition, and I think that's normal in the marketing field. You're in competition with all these brands, so there are weeks where we will lose against some of the competitors because they just they had a better idea that week on creative production, or they knew about an insight that we did not know about. And so that's why we built some of these tools, some of these competitive tools. I'm getting a sense of what is going on in the market, such that we're on top of it as much as possible. But even then, sometimes you lose, and it's really like the team's job to figure out how to stay ahead. And it's quite fun. Like that's the part that I find like quite interesting. There are weeks, especially on like Google Ads, where they literally will tell you the reason the cost per click went up is because there's competitive auctions that you're in, and they're gone more competitive than before. And it's quite really interesting to do it, because you're really sitting, you don't know these marketers, you're not talking to them, but in a way you are. You're sending each other signals on these platforms. And I find that like quite poetically interesting, that you are in competition, but without meeting the person behind the dollars and behind the numbers. And I find that quite interesting to like look at and observe. And throughout time, you'll see these like trends and how people are doing this stuff. So even though I think it's hard, I find it quite interesting.
Me too. Even the way you describe it, just like knowing someone based on their work, and you're reminding me of, I used to know all these like sort of copywriter type of people, like weight loss copywriters and people like that. And sometimes I would like read a sales letter, and I would be like, I think I know who wrote this, just from like the feeling of the words and the way that they phrase certain things. It's like I'm kind of like just picking up on it must be this person doing this kind of thing. And so it seems like a lot of your kind of engineering background is going into debugging the system, right? And then just like making your best guess, taking some action, looking at the data, and just kind of iterating. Because like you're mentioning things like this kind of visual game that you're playing, right? The visual auction, you said, and being in this window of attention getting, so that way people notice you and you stand out, but not too weird where they won't even pursue that ad. And then you're also talking about the debugging the system aspect of kind of managing expectations and educating your clients a little bit, because I think a lot of us can relate to that, of that whole idea of like running a split test and being like, well, I'm looking at this and it feels like this one's winning, but when you look at the graph and the data, you're like, no, they're actually neck and neck, or like, this, it's still too close to call, or this one is about to pull ahead. Or even like in the growth of your business, many times there's like the lag time factor, right? Like you do all this work, you do all this activity that doesn't pay off until 90 days later. And then you think like, oh, well, I'm seeing results now from this thing I did 90 days ago. And maybe I just gave up. And I'm like thinking, I did the work then, and then I gave up, and then it paid off, and it messes with your head. And many times you have to just say, let me turn off the emotions and go back to the data, and then kind of, regroup from there. And so it's cool to hear about you in your journey. And so you mentioned there about how you kind of, sometimes you find ways to stand out and beat these other agencies. So can you kind of tell us about Pearmill? And you told us a little bit about how like you're separating these different teams these days, but what is it about Pearmill that we should be excited about moving forward and really paying attention to?
Yeah, I think, there are really two reasons why you should be, how agencies are structured, right? Two ways, generally speaking. One is there is like an arbitrage game. Quite a lot of agencies will hire people who are cheap, who are quite good at what they do, and then they will sell them to you at like a higher rate, right? So like that's the super majority of agencies are sort of like an arbitrage model, right? And then there's the other types of agencies where it's an expertise model, right? So there is so much expertise concentrated that you want to work with that agency because you're going to do better with them. And the reason for that is either like they're very good at talent acquisition, they see a lot of information or data, or they have some like proprietary tool or product, right? We want to be on the other side. Like we want to be on the expertise side. You should be coming to us not because you want to do the work for cheaper, because we're definitely not cheap as an agency, right? You want to be working with us because you are sort of like buying expertise in two formats. One is just, we have a lot of data. We spend double-digit millions every month. And so we're just seeing a lot in the market, and that information is useful. We'll literally tell you what's happening in the whole ecosystem like every week if you ask us, right? And the other part is just the tooling and the process underneath everything that we do, right? So we're quite process-driven in that, you can literally go into our ClickUp, which is what we use for task management, and go back in time and figure out all the different things we did in your account, why we did them, what the results were. All of it is documented super deeply, right? And the reason we do that is because we care. We think that the reason we are successful is not so much because even the data or the people that we have. We are successful because we're very good at running this process, right? And I think everyone hears about experimentation and running tests and things like that. Of course, that's what we do. That's the main process. But how tightly we do it, how well we maintain documentation, how well we are learning across the market and then applying the learnings at the micro brand level, that's the process that we are trying to master, right? And so you're working with us for these like two general reasons. And coming together with us and partnering with us for a long term. So like on average, our clients have been with us for a year or two. We've only been around for 3.5 years or so. That's like the majority of the lifetime of our company. So that's kind of what we want to be doing is you work with us because it's super worth it, even though it may be expensive. And you get really not just the resources that you were hoping for, but also this layer of expertise where you can call someone up and say, I want to spend another $5 million this year. Can we think through that? And you can trust that on the other side of the phone, there is, and I use this phrase a lot, is that there are adults in the room that can help you think through that problem, right? And that's kind of the way we think about Pearmill.
I love your enthusiasm here. And there's so much to think about as far as how you and your team are like innovating and collaborating where the sum is bigger than the parts. And that's really, it's cool moving forward because as you said, there's kind of there's two possibilities, right? There's the kind of the arbitrage and being a reseller and saying, I'll hire some content writers to provide content writing. I'll hire video creators to provide video. But then what you have going on is you're hiring different talents and they're working together and you're trying out different software tools. In your case, sometimes making new software tools and then always kind of focusing on the continuous improvements of your processes. That way you can just become better and strengthen that muscle, to use the metaphor that you used earlier. So that way you can just, no one can catch up with you, right? Because you're always just doing all kinds of cool things, and you're just always getting better, instead of just kind of buying low and selling high, basically. Instead, you're kind of creating something new and unique and magical. And so I'm super excited about what you and your agency have going on. So if someone wants to go to pearmill.com and take the next step with you, how do they know if they're the right fit for your company? And then if they are a fit, what should they then do?
Yeah, so there's basically two types of companies we work with. So either you're on like the hyper growth path, right? So that means you're trying to grow at least 20% month over month, like you're going through hyper growth. And we work with that type of company. And then the other company is, we call these sort of like extremely profitable, safe companies in a sense. So like either you're, a 10 to $20 million business, or you're a public company. We have both of those types of clients, and we work with those folks in a totally different way. And so we either can work with them on just one-off basis and come help you with creative production or landing page optimization, etc. Or you can come and work with us to partner deeply, where we even sometimes do revenue sharing with some of those types of companies, right? So you might fall into one of these two buckets, and usually at a slightly higher scale. So you are spending at least tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on ad spend, and that's where we are the right fit. And you can come to us for all these different forms of services. And on the site, there's actually a questionnaire you can fill out that will bucket you properly and tell you what we would do for you given your current state of your business. So you can go to pearmill.com and do that. But for these like hyperscale companies, we like to work full stack, is what we call it. We're going deep with them to discover how to actually scale you up. Some really good examples we have are Sandra, I mentioned, ramp.com, that we were there for them for a couple of years, and they took them through hyper growth. They're, I think, the number one or number two fastest growing SaaS company in the world, where we helped them get there. And on the sort of profitable side, because hyper growth usually means you're losing money for a while until you make money. And on the profitable side, we work with all sorts of companies like e-commerce marketplaces, and even Autodesk, that's sort of like a prosumer SaaS company. So we're kind of all over the place on that front, but all of them follow this sort of like, are we growing at either a very fast rate, or we're trying to be extremely good at efficiency? And so we would then bucket you based on how we then approach the account, because sometimes scale and speed matters much more than efficiency. And so we're going to think about the process differently. But those are the two processes internally that we run, and you can fall into those processes basically.
Amazing. I love your mindset, Nima, and especially as far as what kind of companies that you want, and you say there's kind of these two extremes, right? There's the hyper growth and there's the safe companies, and depending on which type of company you are, there's a different path, different strategy, depending on what you want to accomplish with that company. So there's been just so many like deep ideas I'm going to have to digest for a while here based on what we spoke about. And so if you fall into that kind of range that Nima mentioned of ad spends tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands per month, and you're either a hyper growth 20% month over month company or a safer company, then go to pearmill.com. That's pearmill.com. And as we wrap up our conversation here, Nima, do you have any like final parting words of advice? Is there something like a quote or a philosophy or a lesson that's really stuck with you, or some really good advice that you wish you'd gotten 20 years ago? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, it's funny. We've been talking a lot about what marketing really means for the past few weeks with some of my friends, and I think like I'm realizing maybe that I have a different viewpoint on this, and a lot of marketers think that their job is to convince customers or potential customers to become customers, and their job is like convincing. I would highly disagree with that. I think the marketer's job is to essentially just show someone what is available. I have a Marxist upbringing, and now I run a company, which is quite paradoxical. And the reason I find this system quite interesting is because advertising is actually solving this problem that exists in capitalism, in that you as a customer do not know what the options are out there in order to make the best economical decision. And so your job as a marketer is to be that actor, to be the actor that helps the customer discover the best solution. And so long as you're working on the best solutions, and I think that's what you should do as a marketer, stop working on things that are not the best solutions to things. Go find the best companies and the best products, and then make sure they get the most attention, because that's what they deserve, right? And so that's the way we think about it is, can we work on the best products and do our job in this sort of ecosystem, in this market, to provide the customer the best option and tell them about it so that they make the best economical decision, right? So can you think through that as a marketer? Go work at a company or go work on products that you think are the best products in their space, in their market, and do the best job you can.
Powerful. I love it. Be a shower, not a convincer, and find those best solutions. Nima Gardideh from Pearmill.com. We will see you there. And thank you, Nima, for blowing our minds with all this really great business owner, entrepreneurial sort of engineering advice. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you too.
Thanks for having me.